welcome to the November 3rd edition of the Business Perspectives. Tonight we're discussing nationalization versus expropriation, states' rights. Please join us, we'll be right back.
The Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Western Union, has recently been distinguished by receiving the 5-Star Quality Service Award from Western Union.
The 5-Star Quality Service Award signifies that the Chamber holds the gold standard in outstanding customer service, in being courteous, efficient, and transparent in the services we provide.
Can you receive superior customer service at any of our chamber locations?
Yes. Come and visit us today!
Slow motion.
Mega awesome, I'm super extra mega awesome.
Just killed it, brothers Habet.
Good evening and welcome to the Chamber's Business Perspectives. I am Celine Cleland Gomez. The Business Perspectives is brought to you by Brothers Habet, the Angeles Press, Pandora's Window Box, and of course Idea Lab Studios. It's also brought to you by the Chamber's Western Union franchise, the only countrywide network and the only network with the 5-Star Award for quality. Tonight's show is the third in a 4-part series on formerly the 9th Amendment, now the 8th, to the Constitution, where we attempt to dissect the issues and implications associated with the amendment. An amendment to the Constitution is no small undertaking for a democratic state, and civil society actors like the BCCI have a responsibility to ensure its constituents at the very least understand the implications. So far, we've discussed the legal and economic implications of the 8th, albeit not exhaustively, but with important conclusions. Legally, the amendment as passed inspires a debate as to whether the Constitution is founded in constitutional supremacy or parliamentary supremacy. The Bar Association argues that the amendment has the effect of defeating the doctrine of constitutional supremacy and replacing it with parliamentary supremacy because future constitutional amendments will now be exempt from the reach of the phrase "any other" in the Supreme Law Clause. If so, this is a foundational shift with serious implications for the rule of law. Economically, all parties agree that nationalization is going to cost us. What is not agreed are the quantum, how we're going to pay for it, and whether the benefits of state ownership outweigh the financial costs. Throughout the discussion, though, the words nationalization and expropriation have been bandied about, and tonight's discussion takes a closer look at the meaning and the implications of each. We expanded discussion to consider whether the 8th is likely to impact Belize's standing within the international community of states, and if it is to be affected, what that effect is likely to be. I am joined by two esteemed guests who are definitely no strangers to the Chamber and who are infinitely qualified to opine on this issue. Senators Godwin Hulse, our private sector senator, and attorney Lisa Schuman, who was at one point the foreign minister and ambassador to the OAS and to the US. Welcome.
Thank you.
Very, very happy to have both of you here. So this is a very important show, and I think it's pivotal in the series because since the beginning, since the first show, we've talked about nationalization, and then the word expropriation is thrown in there, and we've attempted to define it, but we haven't really delved into what it means in a general sense and in a legal sense, and that the implications are just broader than the issues that we've been discussing thus far, and that is, as I said at the top of the hour, the point of the show this week. So, if y'all can take us through this. What exactly do we mean when we say we're nationalizing the public utilities.
Okay, I guess the classical explanation for that, and the simplest explanation I can give, would be when a government decides to take private assets and make them government. That is, the assets are either wholly or mostly privately owned, and the government then decides to take those assets and make them government assets, and thereby going through a process of what is called nationalization. It normally calls for either the passing of laws or, in some extreme cases, changing the constitutive documents of the entity that you're taking, whether it's a company or whether it is actually assets belonging to a company, because it doesn't have to be the taking of the company. For instance, if you take all the main assets of the company and leave it a shell, that is just as much nationalization. So that's the short answer to that.
Right.
I don't know whether Senator Halls would like to
yes,
expand.
pleasant good evening, and thanks for inviting me to the show. Joined by my esteemed senator as well. Yes, I fully agree. I think that one of the things that has not been fleshed out fully in Belize is this whole concept of what it does and what it means. The Constitution has some clear guidelines of how you go about this, but in the economic and the practical sense, there are also some other issues that one has to consider. Primarily, when you say public sector acquisition, who pays? And what are the benefits of this? I mean, is it just to puff up your chest and say we own? Then you ask the question, who's we? You get also into the issues of who runs, who manages, because that changes as government changes and the political directorate changes. And then you get mass exodus and mass importation and back and forth. So you can actually ruin an enterprise that way if you're not very careful. You also get into the issue of public sector accountability for that entity, and who oversees that, who manages that to make sure that it is not that it's not just a big hole through which you drain. Because when private sector is inefficient and fails, it fails. When public sector entities are inefficient, they don't fail. They're propped up by tax dollars.
Exactly.
And that is what is important also to add to this mix.
Actually, the final portion in this series, we're going to just discuss just that, the advantages and disadvantages of having utilities run in the private sector vis-a-vis the public sector. But that's not the topic of the show tonight. So we're going to, of course, discuss some elements of it because it's inextricably linked. But at the end of the day, do governments have the right to nationalize?
I think most anyone will agree that governments do have the right to nationalize. And in fact, such a right is enshrined in our own constitution at section 17. That is, the section says that the taking by the government of any private property must be done under a law which determines reasonable compensation within a particular time. It must be certain. It must be for a public purpose, etc., etc. All of those areas that have been discussed in the media almost endlessly.
Do governments have the right to expropriate?
No. Expropriation is the taking of private assets without compensation. So, until you have paid somebody for the assets that you have nationalized, you can be said to be expropriating if, for instance, you haven't set the conditionalities under which you're going to pay. And that is a part of the issue here. What we have is a situation where government has passed various acts, and since arrangements have not yet been made, compensation has not yet been determined. In fact, the negotiations that have to take place as to what value is and all of that have not even been commenced. It is therefore fair to say that up to this point, it is an expropriation. Now, at the point at which government makes good on the need, and there is a need to compensate, then you start talking about it as being nationalization. It perhaps is to some people the difference between the glass half full and the glass half empty. However, I think any owner of private assets would agree. It is very important as to whether you've been paid or not.
But in the in the case of nationalization, there are clear limits to states' rights in the sense that you just can't, as you say, walk in and take somebody's private property, particularly if you reside in a democratic state. In the sense that in states that are communist, because there are no such thing as private rights, the states are saying, I can take your property and I don't have to pay you.
And there is a UN resolution which was passed, I believe, in 1962 that
That's
says
correct.
very clearly otherwise, because whereas you may speak of communist states, I prefer to define them as autocratic states of whatever kind,
We'll work with
whether
that.
they're theocracies or whether they're fascist states or whether they're communist states. The point is that several of these states were, prior to 1962, insisting that the state can do away with the concept of private property, therefore, meaning I don't have to compensate you if I take your assets because it all belongs to the state for the greater common good anyway. In 1962, the UN passed a resolution which bridged that and the Western ideal of the notion of the sanctity of private property very neatly and said very clearly that there had to be reasonable compensation that would be paid for whatever assets were seized. Okay? Now, the difference comes in as to how much do you pay, when do you pay it, and how do you pay it.
All right. So I will get back to that. But what, in a sense then, there are conditions that make a nationalization or an expropriation legal.
An expropriation is extra legal because you're not compensating. So remember what it is. An expropriation is actually a nationalization gone bad, gone sour.
Right.
I take it and another pay you.
Right.
That is an expropriation. That is extra legal. That is not allowed. What is allowed to a state is nationalization. And that then implies that not only will you will pay within a reasonable time, you will pay proper compensation, and you will ensure that the person or persons or entities from whom you have taken will have recourse to a proper court of law to be able to contest. Yes, what is known as due process, to be able to contest when you pay, how much you pay, and how you pay. Because that is important. And also to contest the issue of whether it is for a public purpose. Now, this last is particularly interesting in the case of Belize because, as you know, by a stroke of a pen, the passage through houses in the amendment formerly known as the 9th and now the 8th, our government has deemed that the taking of both BEL and BTL is for a public purpose.
Yes.
And the thinking is that then you put it beyond a court's challenge. And there are many, many lawyers, expensive and not so expensive, who will tell you that that is an eminently legal point and one which will no doubt be litigated no matter what anybody thinks or says, because the stakes are simply extremely high where both of these assets are concerned. They're both very expensive things.
I think that you're absolutely right, and one of the reasons why you see in our system and our constitution this whole issue of public sector acquisition of private property was placed under Part 2, which is the fundamental rights and freedoms of the people of Belize, because the private property is sacred property. I mean, in discussing this over the period of time that it has been bandied about, I have attempted on the media and other elsewhere to make the point that while we focus on BTL and BEL, and there's a rhetoric on both sides, think about the guy who has a bus and his license is suddenly taken away. Or think about the guy who had a piece of land and he's a quote-unquote a nobody, although there is no such person. Everybody is a person. And his land is taken away. Nobody stands up in defense of him or her. But it is nevertheless property that the public sector has decided we are going to acquire. And then if you don't have the deep pockets to go through the lengthy legal process to get adequate compensation, you are out in the cold. I have been there a couple of times for as long as 10 years trying to get payment. And this is, and when you have, when that certainty is taken away, that you're there with a sense of anxiety that, you know, do I really have this, and can I pass this, and can I bequeath this to a future generation? it doesn't spell well for your enthusiasm to move forward. That is why it was placed in that part of the Constitution, so there could be absolute certainty that, as my colleague said, it is only when it is deemed absolutely necessary. There is adequate compensation provided. It is proportionate, means if you have 100 acres of land, for example, and the government feels it needs to widen the road or to put a school or something, then the public good will trump your private good. But it doesn't mean your 100 acres goes. If they only need 10, then that's what they take. And they don't take 100 and sell off the 90 to somebody else and leave you out in the cold. It should also, it embodies a discussion with me beforehand to ensure that I am satisfied as to what is happening and what you're going to pay me. And it doesn't imply at all in that section that you will force your value on me. It implies that we are going to have a reasonable, timely settlement.
Well, let's look at a very different situation of nationalization, that of BWS, where in fact the discussion was had beforehand as to what would have been the value. Then BWS was renationalized by the government, and the net result hasn't been a whole lot of expensive litigation and uncertainty.
But in that case, as you pointed out, the investor and the state decided to sit down and decide how best to proceed with this.
And that is always the way to go about nationalizations. It involves less pain for all parties, and certainly then it doesn't impact the investor profile on your country.
All right. When we come back from break, we're going to discuss the nationalizations of BTL and BEL. We'll be right back.
This season, say happy holidays to your customers the personal way. Get your personalized corporate holiday greeting cards now at Idea Lab Studios, and we'll give you the design at 50% off with orders of 500 or more. Get your 2012 calendars ready too with custom desk, wall, and pocket calendars. Idea Lab Studios, where ideas take shape. Call us today at 223-6386 or visit our website at www.idealabstudios.com.
So why should you shop at CGI? Because they have it all. At CGI, they offer every promotional product you can dream of. T-shirts, pens, key holders, mugs, signs, full-color banners, dickies, trophies and awards, jerseys, rubber stamps, embroidery, and so much more. When they say everything, they mean everything. All printed in their facility in Orange Walk with the highest quality at the best prices using state-of-the-art equipment. At CGI, they want you to have the best shopping experience possible. They are the promotional product powerhouse you need to get the job done. CGI looks forward to serving you. Call 322-2282 or 422-0151. CGI, products that promote.
Introducing eZone Belize, the fastest, most reliable way to ship internet purchases and just about anything to Belize. It's easy, affordable, and fast. We provide you with a personal U.S. address and ship twice a week direct to Belize for as low as $1.55 U.S. Ship it safely and reliably with eZone Belize. Call us at 322-2283 for details and start shipping today, or visit our website at getezone.com.
Today's world is filled with opportunities. Travel to exotic lands.
Things to do with your loved ones. Perhaps build your own new home.
Start that can't-miss new business.
Send your kids to college.
Enjoy your grandkids when that time comes. And if you could gaze into a crystal ball right now, you might just see how you can make these dreams come true.
Ah, there they are. The professionals at RF&G Life Insurance. Protect your dreams with many life insurance options.
Pension plans, individual and group health insurance.
Also individual or group plans that help you pay for your dreams.
Speak to the professionals at RF&G Life Insurance today, because in life, it pays to get it right.
RF&G Life Insurance is a member of the Roe Group of Companies.
So welcome back, and tonight we are discussing the nationalization States' Right versus Expropriation, and it is the third in a four-part series on what is now the Eighth Amendment. And if you are just joining us, my guests are Senators Lisa Schumann and Senator Galvin Halls. And before we went to break, the panel was discussing the definitions of nationalization and expropriation, and we agreed that there are some key points to both, but that nationalization, if done right, should be accompanied by key concepts, and these are that nationalizations, the conditions that it must meet. It must be for a public purpose, there should be no discrimination, it should be accompanied by compensation, and there should be due process. And Senator Schumann was describing in the case of BWS that in fact those conditions were met, in your view.
Correct.
Now we're going to discuss the issues of the nationalizations associated with BTL and BEL.
Let me, before we go into that, let me make an additional point on the issue of expropriation. Don't forget, another good distinction between what is nationalization and expropriation is the issue of whether there is forced divestment or not. Generally, although not always, in a nationalization situation, there is the prior discussion before, like Senator Halls mentioned, and then therefore modalities are worked out. There may not be agreement as to all the modalities, but the schedule as to nationalization will go ahead. In an expropriation, it is normally a forced divestment of the assets of the foreign direct investor. There is normally no choice and no time, and it is an immediate takeover, which has effect right away and which takes away management control immediately, so that there is an immediate effect and benefit, if one wants to look at it that way, to the divesting body. That means the government of Belize. The government of Belize, in this case, who took it over, immediately takes over control of management and everything.
But Senator, I don't know, Senator, if you want to
Yes,
answer that.
well, clearly, and one of the things that I think, and it's a fine point, but it is a point that needs to be made, is that in all of this process, the law is clear. It's been repeated many times. This argument as to whether the government has the right or not is not the debate.
Correct.
The debate is the process, which is laid down, and how we do and how we carry out that process. And the most important part of that process is the purpose. What is the purpose?
Correct.
And therefore, when those are clear, if those are clear, then there's no quarrel. The modalities which Senator mentioned need not be 100% agreed, or you need to acquiesce to it, but the spirit of that process is what needs to be entrenched and understood, so that then, if you wind up in court, you wind up in court not to discuss and debate the action and the purpose, therefore, but the compensation for that action that you've taken.
So why is it then, in the case of BTL, we are arguing just exactly what you said, the actual taking, and not
because
the issue of compensation?
this is what happens in an expropriation. And in addition to BTL, don't forget, BEL has also signaled, the former owners, Fortis, has signaled that they are going to challenge the taking of BEL and its BEL assets. Now, as I've said, there is an impact directly that happens. It's both financial and political. Politically, the government that is expropriating usually gets some bounce. Nationalism, pride, people feel like it's now ours, we're going to do well. Lovely. Then there is the financial aspect of it, which has an impact both internally and externally. Internally, the government gets an additional bounce because now it has control of assets over which it can now extract income. But while that is going on, you also de-incentivize foreign direct investors who are outside looking in and saying, but a taking over has occurred, which we certainly understand can happen. In fact, Celine, there's political risk insurance. I don't think many people know. But political risk insurance is typically bought by foreign direct investors who want to make sure that if there is a taking over, they are going to be cushioned by the impact. It bridges that time between when their asset has been taken over and when they've been compensated. And if a country engages in too many of these either nationalizations or worse, expropriations. The political risk insurance charged for a foreign direct investor in your country goes up commensurate with the level of those expropriations, and so your country becomes a bigger and a bigger risk.
And I really want to talk about the issues related to investment.
Right.
Going
so,
ahead.
But then going back to BEL and BTL, what you find now are not that we're talking about the modalities, but that we're now actually even at the first step, which is challenging the entire public purpose of the issue. As you've seen, the government has passed an amendment saying, we deem that these takings are for a public purpose. However, they run right up into the brick wall of Section 17 of the Constitution that says, taking must be under a law. And they never say, we're excluding the Constitution under a law, which then therefore must be a law that states a proper public purpose. In a scenario where this very issue was being challenged and was challenged successfully in the Court of Appeal in the case of BTL, and the government then chooses not to go on challenging that, but passes a law, that certainly goes back to the issue of what Senator Hall said, that when you go to court, you're actually going to court with a very bad optic, a very bad look on your case, because rather than trying to work out the issues, you've simply gone ahead, steamrollered the process, passed the law, probably ridden over separation of powers and the rule of law to get where you want to go.
So, I think, and I've made this point several times, in fact I made it in the Senate, that Section 145, which puts this cap, this final statement, so to speak, on the ordinary law, the law under which you acquired, which says this law was proper, to my mind, stepped into the purview of the courts, which was the very argument that had been used under Section 2, other law. That other law, you have all the attorneys at your disposal, you have everybody at your disposal, you have the legal minds to make sure that other law is proper, that therefore you will win. And it's not a question of winning, it's a question then of going into the compensatory aspect of the other law that you have, under which you've acquired. But there's a deeper underlying issue which I wanted to raise quickly, if I may, and that is that the United Nations resolution that Senator talked about, there was a subsequent one also that dealt with these, with property in the sense of mines and minerals and those things, which as countries became independent out of the
national resources,
right, the natural resources aspect, which they felt primarily people did have a right to, because the colonial powers were actually exploiting them and getting them out. The chance out of your natural resources, the environment was
and
being...
it's your patrimony.
Right, the environment was being damaged, etc. And so governments were kind of given the right to say, okay, you could go there. But even then, it protected the right of those who owned it to this, to compensation, etc., etc. But it gave them that.
Hence the Bowen case and the landowners case.
But people do look, investors look to those and say, well, I won't have a chance to get hold of any mines. Those days have gone. So that doesn't affect the investment climate per se. But when you have other investments which are developed investments based on technology or based on other issues, it steps into a little different area, because then people begin to think, well, this is an instrument, this is an activity created from my entrepreneurial capability and my skill and my finances. And then it becomes even more sensitive, because you are depriving me in the long run of my continued livelihood based on that. In the case of...
And the fruit of your intellectual property, which is
in
important.
The case of mines and minerals, it is a patronage, a patrimony that you're going after, and it has a shelf life, so to speak. It is depletable, and people understand that more. So you want to be careful there as well, because when you look at telecommunications, and I've made this point repeatedly, it is a dynamic technology. Obsolescence is quick.
Yes.
And
two or so years now.
It's quick. And everybody has a, what is it now, iPhone 4 and a 4G and something and something. So if you have a dinosaur, nobody want that. So you have to look at the investments required to continuously update these things and to keep it on the cutting edge, etc., etc. You have to look at who you bring in to help you with some of this technology and whether they'd be willing to come in or not if they think that it is uncertain. So there's a lot of issues to be discussed around this matter. And unfortunately, these discussions never took place.
No. You see, here's the thing with, for instance, BEL. Let's look at BEL. That probably is the less discussed one, so I'd like to look at it for a minute. Fortis has particular experience in dams and running hydropower. They are acknowledged in Canada and in northern United States as being some of the leaders when it comes to not only the technology but the management of these systems. What the findings are is whenever an industry which you nationalize or a sector which you nationalize is particularly either technology rich or is intensive in proprietary technologies or needs specialized knowledge, when a government takes it over, they will never empirically run it as well as how it was being run by those investors who either had the technology or the expertise or the know-how. This is why it's always good to have these discussions before, because it is quite possible that you nationalize the asset but you leave management and control, or you go into a contract for managerial services with the company from whom you've expropriated assets. Because let's be real, the physical plant of BEL not only is almost obsolete, but it requires a heavy investment and inflow in order to keep it running. It's expensive to keep the transmission lines going. That makes you no money. What actually makes you money is the asset that allows you to continue to produce electricity. In this case, that's actually BECOL, not even BEL. BEL is more in the business of transmission, and unless you find an entity that is willing to continue to invest in mines, in hydropower, you're not going to have a situation where there was the Maya 1 and the Maya 2 that were planned, and you're able to tap into that. We brought ourselves quite a far way along in hydro, and yet if we don't keep up, because demand always keeps going up, we are going to put ourselves right back in the position that government said it was trying to avoid when it took over the asset, i.e. uncertainty of power, etc., etc.
That is why on that note, at least the one acceptable change was the removal of Section D, which talked about other utilities, because, I mean, sitting on the Belcogen board and having developed that project from its inception and the 7 years of negotiations with the various banks and all that is involved in that, the first thing that you get is a sense of nervousness. Where will this go? And those kinds of investments are huge and complex, and you need to be certain that down the road there's going to be a reasonable return on that investment, and that in fact you can go forward with it. There are many, many other potential investors on the horizon in energy. A lot of people are not aware of that.
Wind and solar in particular.
Energy. And so energy stands out really big, and it's almost like a red flag when you're looking at energy.
But let's assume, in the case of BTL, that the investor loses all the legal challenges.
Correct.
Right? And it's nationalized. Now we have to discuss the issue of compensation.
Ah, yes. Now you have to pay for it.
And there are, this is one of the areas that I think there's the least amount of agreement on how you go about.
Well, I mean, the government of Belize has already signaled its intention to take its time over the issue of compensation. It has already says it will fight tooth and nail over the quantification of what is even owed. And then there's this discussion of when you come to what it is you say you're going to pay, how you're going to do it.
Yes.
And that has to do with paying via T-bills and T-notes, treasury bills and treasury notes over a period of time, which, depending on how you're graded or not graded by the rating agencies, that will depend on the quality of your money and your bills.
Well, I think that that issue of compensation is very, very important, and one that should not be overlooked or taken lightly, because it speaks really now to the issue of confidence. So we can get past the hurdle of government acquisition, which we know is possible, and which the Constitution gives the right to.
Um,
We can debate a little bit the process.
I want to take up that point when we come back. We'll be right back.
The Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Western Union, has recently been distinguished by receiving the 5-Star Quality Service Award from Western Union.
The 5-Star Quality Service Award signifies that the Chamber holds the gold standard in outstanding customer service in being courteous, efficient, and transparent in the services we provide.
Can you receive superior customer service at any of our chamber locations?
Yes. Come and visit us today!
This season, say happy holidays to your customers the personal way. Get your personalized corporate holiday greeting cards now at Idea Lab Studios, and we'll give you the design at 50% off with orders of 500 or more. Get your 2012 calendars ready too with custom desk, wall, and pocket calendars. Idea Lab Studios, where ideas take shape. Call us today at 223-6386 or visit our website at www.idealabstudios.com.
And welcome back. And before we went to break, we were actually beginning to talk about the implications of nationalization on investments and what that means going forward. And Senator, you were making the point, I believe, that the issue of compensation is an important one, and
Yes.
we need to...
Yes, I was making the point that the world is watching.
Mm-hmm.
So there are missteps when you don't engage first, but you go ahead and you act. Okay. Then there is the explanation. There is the national, what seems to be national support based on media reports and all the rest. And then you get to the issue of purpose, and you may get beyond that one. But compensation now is the final issue. And so any private owner says, okay, you didn't engage me, I am not agreeing with your purpose, but I've gotten beyond that. Now let's talk about the compensation. The compensation must then be adequate.
Which, incidentally, we are not there yet in the case of BTL, right?
But it must be adequate, and you
it's
must
been
sit.
2 years.
You must sit with me,
Yeah.
and you must come up to what I consider satisfies me for everything that has happened, including what I have lost, etc., etc. When you don't do that, and if you force your figure, or you get a figure that is not in concert with my thinking, then again it sends even that further signal of confidence in other people who would want to invest and think that what if down the road my property is acquired, I am out for the banks, I have big loans, etc. My compensation is not satisfactory. And while the whole focus here is BTL and BEL, we're talking public sector acquisition of private property.
But in other words, what the government is going to do with the assets that it's taken, how is it going to pay for it, how it will impact our tax base, how it will ultimately impact us. And as a nation, we not only have an obligation to the citizens vis-a-vis making their quality of life better by lowering, for instance, bills. That's just the half of it. What difference does it make if your bills go down but your taxes go up so much that it actually ends up being more because you have got to pay for this asset? Don't forget, every time you realize that you need foreign direct investment or local direct investment, they are both the same thing. Money responds to the same sets of conditions. You are competing with the rest of the world for monies and investment.
Before we get into that issue a little bit more, why should we care what the international community thinks?
Well, clearly small countries don't have the wherewithal financially and otherwise to promote themselves, and any business that you enter into has a foreign counterpart in one form or another, no matter how you look at it. Let me give you an example which people overlook. For example, let us say that this is a fully 100% owned Belizean business, investment is going on, and you're trading with entities abroad. And so there is credit back and forth. You have letters of credit established, there are other liabilities, etc. People are concerned about your stability. Let's be real. Because remember, when
your ability to pay back.
And your ability to pay back. And there are all these claims. But let us say there were parties who BTL, BEL, or any other entity acquired owed CFE, for example, and everybody else. They are concerned about how they will be paid. What I'm saying is that all these things lead not necessarily to people not coming into Belize, but increased costs in insurance, increased risk costs, and everything is a cost. And the cost is what ultimately could make you competitive or non-competitive. So in total, you need to be very careful, very accurate, and move with a firm, clear, guided position in any of these undertakings.
And in this case, in your opinions, where are we on that?
We're not in a good position because we are currently facing not only possible losses in revenue, because what happens, unfortunately, when you start telling people an asset belongs to the people or an asset is now yours, that for we, people start getting the general idea that they don't have to pay for it, and or that government should be subsidizing it to them at lower and lower costs. And therefore, there is a loss in revenue that occurs within the company. When that happens, the company either can't pay its outstanding obligations, which it already has booked years in advance, or can't pay for technology inflows, so it can't keep up with current technology. And then, as Senator Halls mentioned, there is the reputation of the country. And every time you have got to borrow money from either inside or outside the country, they are going to look at your risk factor and see what your profile is in terms of have you been able to settle the contingent liabilities that you have with anybody else. There's mention of that right now in the latest IMF PIN report on Belize. There is a mention right at the very end that says you have got to get those things settled with BEL and BTL because they are going to affect the country of Belize. So now that is very diplomatic language for saying, get your house in order. Don't think you are going to spend a lot of time quibbling and arguing over how much and what and all of this and keep your head in the sand by starting or continuing a litigation fight. That in itself is costly. And remember that the meter is running or the bill is running on having to pay back those entities. In the meantime, interest is running. The cost of financing is going up. And unless you get a handle on that, it spirals out of control. And very soon, you are in the position that unfortunate mortgage holders find themselves. You're in an upside-down situation where suddenly your asset is worth much less than what you have to pay for it. And you have to pay for it.
So the longer we take to get to the discussion on compensation, the more it's going to cost us.
Even if the government cannot settle with entities as to whether the taking was proper or not, it has to start taking the hard steps in order to be able to determine payable compensation. And that means the taking of the asset at the time that you took it and not what you have run it to. Not what you have run it to. You have to pay for it as it was, in the condition that it was.
So let me just ask a question.
And it will just keep going up.
Let's assume that the value increased since the taking. They would have to pay less than what it was worth.
No.
No?
No. The rule of thumb is you have to pay what it was worth at the time that you took it.
So, okay, you took it and it was worth a certain amount.
Yes.
Now that I've taken it over, the value has increased.
Lovely, that's in your pocket.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you get to deduct it.
If the reverse is true
and there are losses, you're going to pay for it.
So, explain
That's why the upside down situation, because when you're in a mortgage and your house is worth more than the mortgage, as long as you're paying your fine, you know, the minute you stop paying and the amount on the mortgage, which is the added interest and late payments and penalty fees, goes up beyond what your house is worth, then you're in this upside down situation.
Something that perplexes me in this situation would be BTL is that the government contends that the shares are worth $1.46 per share based on the NERA assessment. But the central bank and the SSP bought the shares for $5 each.
So there you go.
So
I imagine that
does that
the
mean that we
argument,
overpaid for that investment?
well, either that or that is the fair market value. Take your pick, but they can't both be true. You see?
And I guess these are the issues that will be considered
And
under the discussion on compensation.
Those have got to be the issues. But the point is that, and it's very unfortunate that we didn't sit down and work this all out first and work it out in a sober manner, because they come up no matter what you do. And the bill has to be footed no matter what you do at the end of the day.
And it's not even just share costs. You're talking about the value of the assets and all of these things. In addition, it's a complex formula. It's not going to be as simple as saying, well, SSB paid $5, so that's going to be the compensation rate.
Right. But clearly, you know, if I expect at the time we paid $5, we didn't know it was worth $1.46. Either that, or with the time lapse, the assets have deteriorated to that extent.
What a couple of years.
We don't know. But at the end of the day, though, is there anything that can be done to correct the situation in your view right now, as it pertains to how we're perceived by the international community?
Well, I think everybody knows the story. Let's not fool ourselves. The story that everybody doesn't know yet is this final point of going to court for compensation, adequate compensation. So people walk away, government and people of Belize owns this asset. How they manage it is up then to the people of Belize to ensure. Where they get the money to pay for it is up to the people of Belize to ensure. And whatever other bullets we have to bite for this. It's a done deal, it's behind us. It's a serious lesson for going forward, that we don't get into this, and worse, and I think this point we have to say, to put an issue like this in a political realm, so you have a back and forth and lock out serious, genuine, balanced discourse on the matter. Because there have been lots of people whose voices you have not heard, because they did not want to get into the yes or no, support or don't support, loyal or disloyal, nationalistic or traitor, and all the rest of
patriotic or unpatriotic,
slung around. And it was very unfortunate.
It is, and here's more. I mean, it doesn't really matter at this point what anybody politically makes of it. What does matter is the burden that the country will be left with. It is time for the government, any government, to stop the hostile stance and to start talking to those whom assets have been taken from and try to figure out modalities. I personally don't think it is too late, for instance, in the case of at least one of the two entities.
Sure, BL.
And that should be had, because any lessening of the risk that we already face can only redound to the benefit of the country. It doesn't profit us to continue to try to play politically or financially wrong and strong. That will not help. The first law of holes is, if you're in a hole, stop digging and start trying to find a solution to get out of your hole. So the wrong and strong stance won't help. Start working with people to make sure that you're able to do the modalities so that you don't afterwards burden our children with the crushing debt.
So how do we do this? I mean, does the government of Belize say to the investor, look, let's have a conversation about compensation?
Yes.
Or does this necessarily have to be done through the courts?
No, it doesn't have to be done through the courts.
In fact, it would be preferable if it's not done through the courts.
Agreed. So done through the courts, the lawyers are making money, but the country of Belize is going to be paying the bill one way or another.
On the last show, when we had a discussion about compensation, it was suggested that perhaps one of the parties were not amenable to discussing compensation.
How do we know
at the time
this?
that the asset was taken? We don't know, and in fact that point was made. None of us know. But what is factual is that we have not arrived at the discussion about compensation after 2 years, which has to be an issue going forward.
Correct.
One, because it's costing us more because we're accruing interest and whatever other costs associated with the time span. But two, because of the process.
Correct.
Compensation should be prompt.
Yes.
No? In most of these takings.
It's clear. He says, it tells you that it didn't say it should stretch out forever.
Right.
And
No, in fact, that's one of the factors that can lead to a factual finding that it is an expropriation rather than a nationalization.
But there has to be a good faith effort on both the part of both parties to sit and say, let's talk about
yes,
about
but one cannot wait on the other. Somebody has to make a move.
Has to make the effort.
And in my view, the person in whose hands the assets are and who has to pay has to make that move. In addition to which, that entity happens to be the government of Belize, that has fiduciary responsibility to the people of Belize. In other words, our government, whatever government, owes it to us not to debt burden us so that our children become future debt slaves and we're stuck worrying with problems much bigger than we already have at this point.
And they are big. It's a situation where we have other social issues that need to be addressed that have not been addressed.
That is one of the opportunity costs right away, that you then don't have the money to do social programs that you need to do, and or that you cannot invest in other things that you want into.
There's the other side, of course, that the government talks about the benefits and the benefits to the nation. But those things are what you put on the table so the people of Belize are clear. It need not be a confrontational, argumentative, me say, you say thing. And this is where a lot of times I think we've come very much unstuck. The chamber and a lot of entities, other entities who are saying process, discussion and so on, so gets relegated into this rut of being anti and so on. Why are we
am
going
I right
there?
and are you wrong kind of
there
thing?
when we're saying that, look, if the facts speak for themselves and you are absolutely confident and clear in your approach, then what is the difficulty? There is none.
Just one last question before we close this segment. In your opinions, do you think that the benefits, or at least the purported benefits of the nationalizations, the constancy of electricity supply and reducing the exploitative measures in the case of BTL, do you think those are good enough reasons?
First of all, I dispute that those are the benefits.
Accepted. But those are the purported benefits.
No, I dispute them. One. Two, I have yet to be shown what the benefits are. If we had had this discussion, perhaps those who are concerned like me would have been easier about the taking. And up to this point in time, those benefits have not been shown. So that the facts that you seem to be mentioning to me are highly speculative. And until and unless those benefits are shown to the people of Belize and demonstrated with a proper plan, I'm sorry, I will remain like Thomas. I want to put my finger in the wound.
Right. Accepted. Senator?
I split them in terms of electricity. To me, and I continue to maintain this position, the company we have acquired continues to buy power. It doesn't generate power.
True.
It continues to buy power and distribute power. That is all it does. I maintain that no matter what, that distribution is dependent on a very efficient and technologically sound network, which you have to continue to maintain. But it doesn't generate power. So you still have to buy the power from somebody. I don't believe that you have gained significantly in that particular resource. In the case of telecommunications, I maintain, and history or time will prove me right, that in 5 to 10 years' time, the shorter being more the reality, we will be putting BTL as part of a wider regional package of telecommunications providers in which we are only a very small player. The technology is dynamic. It moves every day. You can now communicate around the world without touching BTL or smart in this country and not even knowing they're existing. You can do that via satellite and lots of other mechanisms.
So essentially in both your cases the answer is no.
And so, no, there may be, but what I'm saying is
I think I'm more pessimistic than he is.
That technology gives me question. House phones and home lines and those things are dinosaurs.
Yes, they are.
I'm sorry, we do have to go take the final break. We'll be right back.
The Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Western Union, has recently been distinguished by receiving the 5-Star Quality Service Award from Western Union.
The 5-Star Quality Service Award signifies that the Chamber holds the gold standard in outstanding customer service, in being courteous, efficient, and transparent in the services we provide.
Can you receive superior customer service at any of our chamber locations?
Yes. Come and visit us today!
This season, say happy holidays to your customers the personal way. Get your personalized corporate holiday greeting cards now at Idea Lab Studios, and we'll give you the design at 50% off with orders of 500 or more. Get your 2012 calendars ready too with custom desk, wall, and pocket calendars. Idea Lab Studios, where ideas take shape. Call us today at 223-6386 or visit our website at www.idealabstudios.com.
Slow motion. Super extra mega awesome. I'm super extra mega awesome.
Just killed it. Brothers Habet.
Final words this segment, and Senator, I'll start with you.
Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on the show. I will simply say that it is very unfortunate that this type of discussion was not engaged early or before we went to all these what we call consultations and then relegated it to a simple yes or no and back and forth. The government, nobody can deny, has the right to acquire property. That is enshrined in our constitution since the inception of our country in 1981. The law is very clear. There's a process to go about that. You create a law under which you do certain things. You talk about purpose, you talk about compensation in a reasonable time, and those elements are what you do. You engage in that process, and if it is all clear to the public that that is what you're doing, and it was my piece of land, and then I say, oh no, you're never going to take it, then the government say, you know what, time is up, I got to do this thing. And there would be no discussion, and the public would be 100% behind you. It is the government's responsibility to clear the air on this one. It is the government's responsibility to ensure that people are not nervous, that people are, it's the government's responsibility to pay. And it is the government's responsibility to inform the people of Belize the benefits of this, the cost of this, and where we go from here.
Wonderful. Senator,
both democracies and autocracies engage in nationalization. That's not the issue. The issue is this, that in a democracy, at the very least, you have got to be able to say you do this under the rule of law, which means essentially to be able to do it in a proper manner and to provide good compensation. Other than the purported benefit that we are going to see lower bills, what really has been brought to the Belizean people so that they get an assurance that the short-term political benefit of some chest thumping and some nose thumbing is going to be outlived by long-term benefit to our country. That has not been demonstrated, and unfortunately, it is the long-term view that our children are going to have to live with. I think that will determine whether history will absolve this government or not. Not only for the fact of taking, because that is really beside the point, but the how and the effect that it will have on our nation and our nation's outlook in the years ahead.
Wonderful. And with that, we close tonight's show. Join us next week for another enlightening discussion, and actually the final in the series. We take on the issue of public versus private control and operation and administration, and the type of regulation and public policies needed going forward. So until then, have a good evening. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Good night.